the United Church of Canada at West Hill Church in Toronto. She also does not believe in God, and she's telling everybody about it. And she's one of the most courageous people I know. She's been out there and just kind of pointing out the obvious that I guess many of us have struggled with, and still saying it from the pulpit. She's led with her congregation, they've been on this kind of 15-year journey toward becoming a theologically barrier-free community, which I'm sure she's going to talk more about. So I'll let her handle that. She is an in-demand speaker, a best-selling author of the books that are on the table over there. One of them is With or Without God. The other one is Amen, or Amen. How do they say it in Canada? I don't know. hey, man. And recently, the people of her congregation, West Hill Church, voted because they feel like they are so aligned with the values of what the Oasis movement represents. They voted to affiliate with the Oasis movement. They have committed to starting a new Oasis community in downtown Toronto, and Greta has all kinds of ideas for new Oasis communities across Canada. We are so thrilled. I feel just so grateful to have her as a part of our growing kind of international now team of people helping to support the Oasis movement and create more communities of compassion and reason. So this is just a really special day for our community, a special day for the Oasis movement in general. Let's welcome to Houston, Texas, and to Houston Oasis, our good friend Greta Vosper.
Disabled. Try again in 1 minute. What does that mean? I've seen that before. Great. Okay, well, I will just keep trying again in 1 minute. What I was going to do was start with a focus moment. Each week at West Hill, once I've determined what the theme is going to be, I write a focus moment, which is a piece of poetry that I read to focus us on the theme. One of the books over there is called We All Breathe. It's one of a series of 3 books that collect those focus moments, and you can use them just to sort of reflect and think. The book called Amen, actually, when you work with a publisher, they take control of the title of the book. And that book is called Amen, What Prayer Can Mean in a World Beyond Belief, which it should never have been titled. We wanted to title it after the first one, With or Without God, Why the Way We Live is More Important Than What We Believe. We wanted to title it, With or Without Prayer, We Are All the Answer We've Got. So anyways, it's not really a book about what prayer can mean in a world beyond belief. And hopefully it will, if you pick it up, you'll see that it's actually a deconstruction of prayer. May help you make sense of some of what religion captures us within, and how we can use some of the things that we learned there to make sense of our lives. Anyway, so my iPad is now able, so let me read my focus moment for this morning. Unprecedented. Every moment that has ever been, every moment that ever will be, even this very moment in which we stand, is unprecedented. There is no set direction it must claim, a momentary brick fixed upon a path that curves toward a known tomorrow. No history, though persuasive, binds any moment to a once-told tale. No universal music relies upon it playing out a single perfect note. We are free. In this unprecedented moment, we can choose from the myriad possibilities, the infinite improbabilities, and yes, from the handful of most likely to succeeds, and make our own future. Indeed, the future is counting upon our choice. May our choice come from a gathering place filled with wisdom, pour forth from hearts strengthened by communal courage, find illumination in the uplifting of all that is beautiful, and may each unprecedented moment lead us from truth ever onward toward truth. Each week at West Hill, I speak, most of my colleagues call it a sermon or something like that. We call it perspectives. And the perspectives is spelled with a bracket around the S at the end of it. So I'm sharing with you my perspective. It's your responsibility to add that S. It's your responsibility to take what I share with you, bring your own understanding, your own experience, your own interpretation to it, and share it somewhere else. So it becomes a perspectives. And I don't have any claim on truth. I'm not right, but I'm rarely wrong. But you get to interpret what it is that I share with you today and what I share anywhere. So I want to give you just a little bit of a history about West Hill and how we got where we got. Back in the year 2000, I was the chair of the presbytery, which is our overseeing body. And because we had a lot of broken relationships in the presbytery, I decided that what I needed to do was go around and just build relationships with congregations. So I took a piece of work that came out of the United Church and went around to those congregations and shared that. And it was just a workshop on core values and core beliefs. Very simple, got people talking, introduced people from different congregations to other people from other congregations. It was really a great conversation starter. But what I learned from it was that when it came to core beliefs, most of the people in congregations had a very, what I refer to as an elementary understanding of Christian beliefs. And I'm not using that as a derogatory term. I'm saying that that's what they learned in elementary Sunday school classes, right? God was a father figure that lived in heaven. Jesus was his one and only son, died for our salvation. Most people weren't really sure what that meant. And those stories had been continued on in people's minds. But I knew that I had gone to a theological seminary where I had been taught to engage the concept of God. And a concept is a human construction. So I had been invited to read what people had interpreted that concept to mean over the years. And I had been exposed to the Bible as a series of texts that had been written by an innumerable number of people who were embedded in particular contexts, political, economic, social, and they had told stories to explain their history. They tried to make sense of the world, but mostly they were trying to control the communities that they were sharing that story with, either to edify them or to convict them, to inspire them or to silence them. So I was taught to engage it as a human construction. And I was taught all kinds of stuff about Jesus as a historical figure and taught to explore the idea of Christology as a concept. So again, it was a human construct. So I've been preaching at this point for probably 8 or 9 years, maybe 10, and it had occurred to me when I did those workshops that no one actually heard anything I said in those sermons. Like, I was sharing that God was a construct and that the Bible is not the authoritative word of God for all time, which I call in my first book Tawagfat. It's not Tawagfat. And I've been talking about Jesus as a person who, did some good things and said some really terrible things, and no one heard any of that. So I was confused and curious about how that came to be. And after I'd had the conversation with the person who had helped me with that project, and we had actually come to that conclusion, the next Sunday I sat down with the bulletin for my Sunday service, and I went, oh, that's why they're not getting it. Because every hymn that we sang had to do with, God in God's heaven and triumphalism of Christianity across the world. Every prayer we said, I would share the intercessory prayers, and I'd say, oh God, in your mercy, and the congregation would say, hear our prayer, all of that stuff. So I had this very clear little moment of speaking honestly about what I believe, but it was entirely encased in this archaic understanding. And that's really when things started to unravel for me. In my book, I talk about theological college as severing the corpus callosum, which is that piece in the middle of your brain. And we were taught, I filled up this side with everything academic about Christianity. And it was like I was on such a journey and so excited to learn all that stuff. This side was being steeped in the liturgical arts of worship, and I was enjoying all kinds of things which my Methodist background had not given me, like liturgical colors and liturgical dance and the use of music and candles and all that kind of stuff. It was orgasmic about what worship could be like, right? But they didn't talk to each other. And so when they started to talk to each other, it was like this explosive moment when I realized, oh yeah, everything that we do out of this side of our brain has to actually connect with this side, and that was the troubling moment for me. So one Sunday, Mike, you're probably familiar with this, you have a week that is just challenging, you don't get your sermon written. So clergy go to the drawer and they pull out a sermon, except I don't write my sermons, so I don't have a drawer. So I got to the service without a sermon prepared to preach. And I got up and I deconstructed God. I talked about why I was no longer willing to use the word God if nobody was going to get what I meant by that word. And I had a very good definition. I still have a great definition of it. But I'm never going to use the word God because you don't know what that definition is, right? So when I use that word, most people are going to, default to the Wikipedia definition of God, right? Which is not what my definition was. So I deconstructed God, then I sat down, picked up the bulletin, and I had to do the intercessory prayers after that, asking God again, in God's mercy, to hear our prayers. So I knew that I was in some trouble, went to meet with my board a couple of weeks after that, recognized that we were having a conversation about my resignation, and they said, well, wait, what might this look like? And of course I had no idea, but that congregation had the courage to say, well, let's find out. And that was in 2001, and we've been doing that work ever since. I tell that congregation that clergy who don't believe are a dime a dozen, but congregations that allow those clergies to speak honestly about what they don't believe and what they do are exceedingly rare. And so West Hill is really the courageous group here who allowed me to have this journey with them and engage them in that conversation. So over the course of the intervening years, there are a couple of things that I've learned that are important about religion, what I call the off-label benefits of religion. And you know what some of those are. The first one is the idea of well-being. Studies have been done that show that people who are part of a religious community have a higher level of well-being than people who are not members of a religious community. And that has always been kind of understood to mean, people who have beliefs feel better about the world because it makes them feel safe and secure, and so they have a higher level of well-being. So Robert Putnam, Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, sociologist, did some work with Cheyenne Lim, and they published their findings in the end of 2010. And they dug a little deeper into those statistics and actually invited people in religious communities with the higher level of well-being to answer some questions. And what they found was that it had absolutely nothing to do with belief. It had everything to do with the number of times those people connected with one another during the week. And if they connected with one another at least once, and usually more than once, maybe twice a week, they shifted from, getting by to a sense of well-being that could flip over almost into flourishing because of the connections that they made. It had nothing to do with how devout they were or how closely they held to the belief systems of the community or the religious system that they were in. It had to do with the connections that they made and how significant those connections were, and whether those connections were going to be available to somebody on a Thursday afternoon when somebody was in need, and not just on a Sunday morning. So that removing people from isolation and bringing them into community, that's what religion has done. And if we think about, and I'm not an anthropologist, but if we think about what religion has done through the course of history, some of the things that it does, it has done that we may be here because religion existed, because it put sanctions around particular behaviors so we didn't actually extinct one another sometime in our historical past. But because it identified who we were safe with. It gave us particular activities that we did that we recognized as in-group activities. So if somebody eats a particular way, then I know that they're one of my people and I can feel safe with them. Or if somebody dresses in a particular way, then they're one of my people and I can feel safe with them. So it bound us together. And religion that thrives, is groups that thrive, are groups that distinguish themselves from the rest of the community around them. So at that lunch thing, you should all start wearing like funny hats or something. So you all recognize yourself, and you'll distinguish yourselves clearly, and that will make for a strong group identity. And a strong group identity is really, really important. So that's one of the things that religion does. Another thing that it does, when people come in together, they welcome one another. They honor one. I'm glad you're here. They give us a sense of worth when we come into a space and someone acknowledges that we're there, and that we're meaningful to them. It gives them a place to expand that sense of relevance and importance. And so it helps our serotonin levels to engage in religion. So those kinds of relationships are a big part of religious gatherings, and they're one of the off-label benefits that I think are really, really important. And I think that liberal mainline denominations have been good at that, and they have also added to something that I think is another off-label benefit of religion, but it's also one of religion's off-label curses that it has left a human community with. And that is the moral fabric of our communities has, for good or for ill, been defined very often by religious belief systems. And so I don't think that community is enough. I don't think that coming together in community is good enough to actually take all those benefits that religion can give us and shift them into what I call that land beyond the beliefs that divide, that can take us to a sustainable future. So community that takes us there, that takes us beyond religion, has to be community that creates or allows to be identified within it a moral fabric that has value, that is of positive value to the community. So in liberal mainline denominations, which are dying like so quickly, it's unbelievable. In my area, we had 24 churches when I started there 19 years ago. We're down to 14 now. Of those 14, 12 in 4 years, between 2010 and 2014, lost 25% of their membership. So the writing is on the wall. They're not going to survive. But what has happened in communities, I think, as liberal mainline denominations have dwindled, is that they have had before this mitigating effect on fundamentalist perspectives in community. Liberal denominations have moved into the place where compassion guides what they do. They have held the Bible accountable to love rather than love accountable to the Bible. And so they have, in many ways, they've taught and broadened social norms, social decisions, and have brought that to the community. But as they fade from view, as that effect that they've had on political discourse, economic, all kinds of justice issues, who takes over that conversation? The conversation is led by those who have left religious communities or who remain in religious communities. And many of those who have left religious communities, when religious communities hemorrhage from the left, there are very few places for them to go. The Oasis is one of those places where they can go, but mostly they leave into isolation. And very often in isolation, when we determine what our values are in isolation from the community, we can come up to some pretty relativist understandings of what's right and what's wrong. Generally, what's right is what I think is right, and I don't care what people around me think. And generally, how I'm going to try to influence the community around me has a very libertarian kind of feel to it. So you have, in our communities, you have arguments taking place between these relativist, libertarian views and fundamentalist religious perspectives. So the moral fabric of community is congested with that argument. So where can we go in order to grab back that moral fabric of social community? And Gary introduced it beautifully already today. Communities that come together around hockey, around football, around planting trees, around car washes, around Little League. Communities who come together like that don't bond on values very often. They don't talk about values. They don't talk about what's important to them. They don't identify what it is that is their highest ideal. They participate in those conversations. They get all the benefits of being in a community. Like you might come and visit me in the hospital if I get sick, if we know each other really well. You might not. But I think what binds community and what has to happen going forward is that we have to identify the values by which we choose to be in community. And that work is a work that then can help us beyond this place. In the communities in which we live and work. We can raise those conversations and we can do it with confidence because we're being taught that language. We're being taught to assess our relationships, our commitments, our choices according to those values. So that's what we do at West Hill. We have a document that's called Vision Works, which was written in 2003, 2004. And we revise it every 5 years, and I have nothing to do with that. I don't participate in that work. The community gets together and they argue about what values they think are the most important, and they articulate them. And they should change from time to time. Our values should change. We should have to re-articulate them. There are some who believe that societies that die are societies that never revisit their values. And when those values are no longer working, they just keep at them and keep at them and keep at them. So communities without values are just communities. Communities that can create a sustainable future, those are communities that have articulated their values. A few weeks ago, I preached a sermon, the Perspectives, at West Hill about hope. And everyone left saying, okay, so I can't use the word hope anymore? Because I had talked about how vacuous the concept of hope is. And I had said that particularly for communities that have grown out of a religious tradition, hope has often been that there's some promise that everything is going to work out later on. Like just, give your heart to it. The universe is going to unfold in ways that will make whatever it is work out. And this is not just a religious concept. It's out there in a lot of different ways. But the idea that hope is just going to make everything work out is a problematic concept. So when I was working a few years ago with the Habitat for Humanity build, and I was supposed to do a welcome, I came up with the idea that hope without a hammer is not hope that's worthy of our time and energy. Hope has to have some kind of a commitment to it. So I have a reading from Rebecca Solnit's book, Hope in the Dark. Hope is not like a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. I say it because hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Because hope should shove you out the door. Because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and the marginal. Hope just means another world might be possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future makes the present inhabitable. I think that when we're able to identify a future that we want, hope gets born. When we identify a future that does not marginalize people based on gender or sexuality or their economic level, who doesn't prejudice against those who aren't as educated as we are, who participate in religious communities or don't, if we identify a future where humans live in dignity, where we get to offer them that dignity, and where we are responsible for helping to bring it about. When we can envision a world in which hope means that the resources that this world offers us are there for generations and generations and generations. We've done a hell of a job of destroying that picture, but we have the opportunity, Solnit says, to actually still work toward making it come true. Hope, envisioning that future, and then putting our shoulders to that work. Each week at West Hill, we talk about those organizations and those people who are doing that work, who have their shoulder up against the wall of impossibility and are pushing it down because they think that we can do something better than that. So hope means that we name those values that can bring that world into being. And I'm going to invite you to name them now. Right? What is it that we have to have in our hearts? What is it that we have to have in our relationships? What is it that we have to have in our communities in order to be able to, A, have the courage to see what that future might be, and then B, have the willingness to make it happen? So when we come together in community, what are the values that are still so important to our relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the planet, that we can't risk letting them go? Gary, you named one when you were up here. You said compassion. Okay, so compassion. Gary starts out with compassion. What are the other values that we would name? Reason.
Empathy.
Empathy.
Respect.
Acceptance.
Tolerance.
Tolerance.
Respect.
Respect.
Engagement.
Engagement.
Effort.
Effort.
Curiosity.
Curiosity.
Courage.
Courage. We can't find our way toward a future that we would want future generations to live in without those values. So the off-label benefits of religion are that we have learned gathering in community is good for us. But we can't afford just gathering in community. We also have to lift up the values that through reason, through exploration, through trial and error, we have found are significant to our survival. And we need to embed them in our relationships. Anything that is too important for us to compromise or lose is what I define sacred to mean. So our relationships, we get, and this is my definition, this is what I used to use, this is what God meant to me. What we can create between us, we can make something that is important for both of us because we're each going to benefit from it, right? I'm going to use you to get what I need and you're going to use me to get what you need. And that kind of relationship is what happens in most of the world. Most of our relationships are like that. But if I enter into that relationship and I identify and see in you that which has dignity, that which has worth, that which is beautiful, and I lift that up and you see that same thing in me, then we create something that is sacred, that we can't compromise. We can't sell that out, and we wouldn't. Once you've created that kind of relationship, you can't give it up, you can't ignore it. And it creates for you a power that I think is greater than any religious power could ever do in this world. Because it gives me courage when I'm away from those people that have dignified me in that way. They give me courage. They give me strength. They give me hope. They give me the sense that I can do what it is I need to do, even when the day is unfolding in a catastrophic way. I can rest. I can walk on what those relationships give me. And it is important, essential, I think, for us to create those relationships with ourselves first. Do I treat myself as though I have dignity and worth? If I do that, then I can use that power and strength to go forward. Do I treat the people around me like that? If we do, I can build that. And do I treat the things around me and the world itself like that? Building relationships of love, of empathy, of compassion, of justice, of courage, of strength, of beauty, of delight. All of those things can call us to a future that gives us hope, and out of which we can draw what it is that we need for future generations. Neil deGrasse Tyson has two principles that he uses, that he bases his life on every day. He tries to learn something else about his world, and he pursues that. If you know Neil deGrasse Tyson's work, he pursues that diligently. And he tries to mitigate the suffering of others. And if we use those two principles, drawing on the strength of the relationships that we have with ourselves, others, and the planet, we can create a future that is amazing. One in which love is one of the most powerful things that we can bring about, and one that we would be honored to leave future generations. That's really all I wanted to share. When I speak, it's I can talk forever and never say anything that any of you are interested in. So the Q&A is
I guess
time.
we feel fortunate, don't we, that this marvelous person is now part of the Oasis family. We're not going to forget it. You get a commemorative T-shirt. People know abundantly.
That's great.
Thank you. Maybe I don't like you can sell it on eBay or something. Do we have any questions for Brenda since she's here? And we got a couple of. I'll work my way back when we do that. Okay, we'll work my way back. It's easier.
Getting dressed up.
A common construct we see in institutions throughout human civilization is a concentration of wealth and power at the top. people often do not share the values of communities like this. Can we overcome that in the long run, or will that concentration of wealth and power eventually defeat what we want to achieve?
I think that if we have communities that are living in right relationship with themselves and with people around them, then we can certainly influence that. I think democracy is a beautiful thing, but I think that we have undermined democracy, and we have allowed, in your country and in mine and in the world, we have allowed systems to create laws and legislations and, partnerships that have allowed money, really, to influence many of those things that we should have been much more careful about. So I think that we have to have the courage to stand up and say, yes, I understand that I signed that. As a member of this country, I understand my nation signed that. But a signature is not as important as future generations. And a signature is not as important as the people in nations that we have enslaved because of our corporate decisions that we've made. And that signature is not more important than the right to clean water and to food and to dignity. And so we have to stand up to some of those mistakes that we have made and haul democracy back to the place that it can actually be a celebration of justice and compassion and integration. But I think until we do that, it will continue to spin toward favoring the powerful and the privileged. And I think that another book that Rebecca Solnit wrote that I used, actually it informed our entire Easter service, is called A Paradise Built in Hell. And she looks at disasters and talks about how when a disaster happens, what emerges defies all of those constructs that we have placed upon ourselves. And when it fails, it's when the elite panic steps in. And elite panic, it can undermine everything. And so we have to be prepared for elite panic when things start getting out of control and the wealthy start fearing that their privilege is going to be taken away from them. We have to be ready to respond to that in ways that are communal and that exercise the rights of all. Thanks. It's not an easy piece.
For the average person, if that doesn't have a community, in the absence of religion, isn't their morals just defined by isolation and materialism?
Absolutely, and I think that's an issue, a huge issue that we haven't grappled with. In 1928, Kershaw Lake was a New Testament professor, and he said that liberal Christianity was going to hemorrhage to the left. It was going to lose people who were exploring, using reason, exploring their faith and leaving, and they had nowhere to go. And so we create our own morality, we make our own decisions, and we're in isolation from one another, and so we end up being a very tribal kind of perspective, my family and screw you, right? And that's the way we do it. And the Atlantic survey recently that looked at Trump supporters, most of them do not attend religious communities. They don't actually identify their morality through a religious community. They identify it through a 3 or 4 generations old idea of what religious morality might have been, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the problems, is we have to find a way to identify the morality by which we want to live, and then infuse both our workplaces and our communities with that morality and be diligent about it.
You have very well outlined how morality is a central issue for communities when it comes to identifying oneself as a non-religious person, and how important this is within communities. I'm interested in another aspect, a more institutional aspect. For example, in the 60s, I believe the Catholic Church reformed itself and brought nuns from a place of isolation into the center of cities. As a result, the number of nuns who started on the path and then very quickly left skyrocketed. So we don't have as many nuns after the 1960s. My question is, how do you see the role of the institution of the church in that process, and how do you see the role of individual clergy who do not share a belief in God, who are disillusioned in that process, in addition to your conversation and thoughts about the role of morality and the community.
Part of my struggle right now with the United Church of Canada is that, they're reviewing me with a view to defrocking me, to use that term, because I identify as an atheist and because I'm open and public about that. And my argument is that they taught me to be an atheist, essentially. They didn't use that word, but they taught me, to use critical tools of inquiry to explore these concepts. So liberal mainline denominations, many of them have been teaching this for a long time. The Catholic Church, when I went through theological college in the late 80s, the Catholic Church had some of the most progressive theological studies going on at the time. Liberation theology and feminist theology was all coming out of the Catholic Church. So we've been applying reason to beliefs for a very long time. We just didn't tell anybody, like it was this big secret. So, but that information is now accessible to everyone. So mainline institutions, as Lake said, have been hemorrhaging from the left, right? And they're losing their impact. The United Church of Canada, its leaders used to be called into Parliament to talk to the Prime Minister and give, some kind of an opinion on something, and it was taken seriously. They're not listened to now, right? So institutions, I think, are going to continue to crumble, mainline institutions, because of that. But I think that there is much to learn from them, and that's that influence on the moral fabric of society, which I think is being compromised. And that's why I stay within the institution and say, you have done some incredible work. The United Church, I use the image of the United Church as this big table, right? And it has one empty chair at it. We all sit around that table and there's one empty chair. And the United Church historically has invited someone to sit in that table that was the last person they ever wanted to hear from. So first it was women, then it was divorced clergy, then it was women who wanted abortions, then it was gays and lesbians, and now it's atheists. And if they take that chair away and say, you don't belong here, that's their death knell. Like the United Church, in my opinion, has always stretched the boundaries and always held the Bible, as I said, accountable to love. The Bible has been subordinate to love. We have always, if the Bible didn't suggest that we should go in that direction, the United Church said, well, screw the Bible, we're not going there then. This is what we have to do. So this whole struggle that it's brought upon itself now is antithetical to the church I know. It's not the church I grew up in. It's not the church I was ordained in. It's not the church that I have been in ministry in for 25 years. So if it wants to remove me from leadership in it, it will remove its relevance in the Canadian landscape. And I think many denominations have already done that. So in that they're going to do that and continue to do that, I think that we get to distill those things of value, those off-label benefits, and infuse new communities with them, new organizations. That's why we joined the Oasis Network. We recognize that, we started a satellite community on the other side of the city last year, and we recognized that model wasn't going to work for us anymore. We needed something that would draw people that was outside of organized religion, because that's what people are looking for. They're looking for community, they're looking for support for their values, they're looking to engage in meaningful ways, they're looking to create meaning in their lives. And the Oasis allows that to happen and invites that to happen. So on May 1st, we have our first gathering of people to create a Toronto Oasis. We have 26 people interested in being on the leadership team. Yeah, I'm so excited about that. And my hope is that they will inspire other communities. There's 2 other cities in Ontario that are already interested in starting them. And I'm hoping that we can glean those very important elements of religion and infuse new communities with them and transform society through that work, right? Because not one person in this place lives in isolation. You engage with people all over the place, and the way you engage influences those people. You get to create what is beautiful, or you get to desecrate those relationships. And when you come into this place and talk the way you do and share the way you do, you are far more likely to go out and share that beyond this place, right? And be the change and the hope and the vision for the future in the world, no matter how no matter how difficult that work may seem to be at any given moment, you have the right, you have the power, you have the opportunity to make it beautiful, and that's what we do. That's what we've got to do.
We're going to have to do one more. We're going to move ahead.
Considering what takes place on a weekly Sunday morning at your service, how does that resemble a Unitarian service?
Maybe in many ways. Many of the Unitarian congregations where we are, even though many of the clergy would identify as atheists, they still use traditional theistic language. So we have some people that have been in Unitarian churches who have come to West Hill because of the barrier-free language. But other than that, actually I loved your question, because most people say, how are you different from Unitarians? And that's, our point is, let's not look at what makes us different. Let's look at what makes us the same. So you said, how are we the same? We're very much the same, except that we don't use that. We don't use theistic language. But the principles that guide them are very similar to the principles that would guide us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. And Greta will be around for lunch today, so we can continue the conversation over lunch.